Welcome to the Dear World Podcast, the place where if you drink your water and you mind your business, you'll be just fine. I'm your host, Miss Amber J. We're all family here, so nothing is off limits. New episodes air every Tuesday at midnight. Do me a favor. Do yourself a favor. Don't forget to turn on your notifications so that you will be alerted whenever a new episode has been posted. How are we feeling today, good people? Welcome to Season 4, Episode 5 of the Dear World Podcast. In a perfect world, I will be able to record every podcast in the manner in which I record this episode. I'm actually recording this episode a week early, which rarely happens. Normally, I'm on crunch time. It's a day before, 2 days before, a couple hours before. I'm actually about to release the episode. So sometimes I don't give myself room or the space to fully articulate myself or to fully process what I want to say and to be planted in a space in which I can speak freely. Someone recently reminded me that I don't give myself enough credit, enough room to say what I want to say. I limit myself. I place filters on what I'm trying to say. And I thank that person for that because sometimes I do. Sometimes I take into consideration too much of how what I'm going to say is going to make other people feel, or how what I'm saying is going to make other people look at me or think of me. So in this episode, I'm going to speak freely. I'm going to do my best to literally articulate myself in a way that most people will be able to understand me, because sometimes I articulate myself in a manner in which only I can understand me. And that's not useful if the goal of this podcast is to be relatable, transparent, and honest. But I have to do so in a way that I'm still being true to myself. Being completely honest, today I was not in a good mind space. I didn't get enough sleep. I was irritated. And usually when I don't get enough sleep, it's one of two things. I'm going to be irritable or I'm going to be excessively hyper. Today was one of those days that I definitely leaned more towards being irritable. And when I'm irritable, I don't receive messages well. I don't engage in conversation well. I don't process things how I normally would if I had enough rest, or if I was fully functioning or fully open to receiving what someone was saying to me. So I stood in that moment of allowing myself to be like, okay, Amber, you are in a fucked up mind state. You're tired and you don't feel like being bothered with people today. And that's okay. I stood in that moment, which prompted me to think about this episode and how we sometimes don't express ourselves, why we avoid expressing ourselves, and why we give these standard responses. And when I mean a standard response, we all have done it. We all are in the habit of doing it. When somebody says, hey, how are you doing? Our typical response is fine. We don't unload our emotional baggage, or we don't fully express how we feel to people. It depends on the people that we're around, the circumstances of the environment, things like that. So a lot of times we give these standard responses. Oh, I'm fine. Now I'm going to speak from personal experience because I don't want to project my opinions onto other people. A lot of times I will say I'm fine, even if I'm not. And that's for several different reasons. One of the main reasons being I'm not comfortable expressing myself to just any and everybody. And I'll be honest, I'll be transparent. I definitely am the type of person that holds grudges when it comes to my emotions. And what I mean by that is, if I came to you once and I tried to express myself and you made me feel uncomfortable, or you didn't leave me space to do so, or I felt like you judged me, I will never express myself to you again emotionally. And I'm surrounded by a lot of people who have done that to me. So it's like a defense mechanism that I automatically give that standard response. I'm fine. I'm perfectly fine. Even though on the inside, I'm not. Or even if you are one of those people that can read me, you can see that I'm not okay. I'm still going to give you that standard response. I'm fine. Simply because at some point or another, you made me feel uncomfortable or unsafe expressing myself to you. However, there have been times where people have done that to me, like completely shut my feelings down or didn't take into consideration what I was saying or belittled what I was saying, whatever the case was. But they came back and apologized and said, hey, you know what? Maybe I wasn't listening, or maybe I did misinterpret what you said, or maybe I didn't take into consideration what you said. All of these things play a part in letting me know that, okay, they did fuck up, because that's human error, but they did come back to me and we had this conversation and we were able to exchange our feelings and get a better understanding of where each other was coming from, which in turn did create a safe space. So I am allowed, to speak freely with this person or express how I feel and feel comfortable doing so. So don't judge me, judge a mama. Sometimes I do hold emotional grudges. However, there have been those times where myself and the other person or other people have separated, and then we're able to come back to the table and have this discussion about how we all feel. And me being human, I do mess up and I try to self-correct, because I know sometimes I express myself inappropriately. I express myself from a place of anger or a place of pain. And sometimes things don't come out how I want them to come out or how I want it to convey the message. So sometimes you do have to, leave it all on the table, walk away, and then come back, and you're able to get a better understanding of how each person felt. And you are able to create that safe space where you can express your feelings freely and not have to give those generic standard responses. But in that same breath, you can't do that with everybody. Some people literally walk away from that conversation and it was what it was. They really didn't care how you felt. They really didn't take into consideration what you said or, what it took for you to say what you said. And that's okay. And that's okay. And again, I'm speaking just for myself, because I understand that everyone is not meant to be my emotional support. Everyone is not meant to be my confidant. Everyone is not meant to be the person that I can run to when I've had a bad day or when I'm feeling emotional or when I'm feeling vulnerable. Everyone does not serve that purpose. So it's okay, again, for me, that I do hold these emotional grudges, because I'm creating this space, this safe space for my emotions, and I'm discerning who I can and can't express myself fully to. But in that same breath, and I'm talking about myself and to everyone listening as well, we do have to be able to confront people in our lives that do something or speak to us in a matter that we don't like. We do have to be able to, confront them about our frustrations, because otherwise it'll be a matter of somebody can say something to you and it'll become a trigger. Oh, you talking to me like such and such, or you looked at me like such and such. No, that's not okay. It's not okay to make someone else bear the brunt of what somebody else did to you. And it's not okay to continue to penalize someone for something that they did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago. And I guess maybe in this moment, I got to reel it back in, because I have to understand that everybody is not as forgiving as I am. But I'm also speaking from a place of realness and a place of honesty. So it's not okay to do things like that. That shit is unhealthy. And I say that from personal experience. I've been the person that, has made somebody else bear the brunt of what somebody else did to me. And I literally had to sit back and reevaluate my actions and how I was treating that person. I know there have been times where someone has done something to me and I did hold it against them years later, or keep bringing it up and trying to penalize them for it years later. That's not fair, especially if you're going to forgive a person, but leave that space open where you guys can have that conversation. And hey, this is why I feel like this. And I feel like I didn't appreciate when you did X, Y, and Z to me. It really hurt me, whatever it is. So bottom line, we have to be able to express ourselves openly to people that have hurt us or that have wronged us. And I'm just saying this from my opinion again, but I feel like that's a part of healing. I feel like that's a part of moving forward. I feel like that's a part of being able to let go. Hey you, are you looking to make a podcast but don't know how to get started? Anchor is the easiest way. First and foremost, my favorite part is free 99. That's right, it's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or PC so that it sounds great. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started. And by all means, take without the tongue tied like a bitch. Take what I say with a grain of salt. And what I mean by that is what I say might not work for you. It might not be applicable for you. It might not be what is healthy for you. But this has been what is healthy for me, is what I have learned. And I'll give you guys an example of what I mean by confronting people. My mom had surgery in January of 2020. The surgery didn't go well. It had several complications, which resulted into her having 2 additional surgeries. I believe it was 2, it might have been 3. So in total, she had 3 or 4 surgeries. And for a moment, her health was touch and go. And during this time, it created tension in my family. Because that's kind of how my family processes things. My sister kind of gets distant. Me and my dad are like in this protective mode, like bears. And sometimes our judgment gets clouded. And in the moment, I didn't realize that until I had this conversation with my sister and I confronted her. We were on the phone and she called me, and it just rubbed me the wrong way what she said. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was something about, well, the doctor said this, da 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 da. And I basically was like, are you team mom or team doctor? Like, this is your mom and you show up when you want to, blah, 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 blah. I went into this whole rant and I confronted her in that moment, but I confronted her inappropriately. I confronted her out of anger. However, there was another time when we were in the hospital again, visiting my mom, and she said, well, she texted me, which was funny because we weren't speaking at all. There was just a lot of tension. But she texted me. She said, hey, can I talk to you? So we go into the waiting room because at this point my dad was in there and we didn't want to have the conversation in front of my dad or in front of my mom. And that's another thing that plays a part in expressing yourself, is the environment. But we'll get back to that. We'll come back to that. So we go into this waiting room. There's nobody in there. We have this heart-to-heart conversation, and we left the floor open to be vulnerable and to say how we really felt. And I told her, I said, I apologize for how I said it, but I don't apologize for what I said. And we had this really great conversation. And I feel like after that, we got closer. We've allowed ourselves space to be us. And I feel like I have a better understanding for my sister and how she processes things. And I feel like she has a better understanding of how I process things. I always tell people, hey, when I'm upset, leave me alone and let me come back to the conversation. And it's because I know myself. I know if I speak to you out of anger, I'm going to say things out of anger. Even if I say what I mean, it's still going to come out wrong. So I think now we have that understanding for each other. But had I not confronted her and had she not confronted me, we wouldn't have had that open conversation and we wouldn't have gained a better understanding of each other. And from that situation alone, I learned that holding things in is draining. Holding on to what you want to say to a person is draining. It will cause you a series of different emotions. It can cause you to be frustrated. It can cause you to be sad. It can cause you to be angry. It can cause you to be depressed because we're holding on to things that need to be released. And I had to learn that feelings can be deceiving. It's like you can feel good in a bad situation. Going back to the situation with my sister, in that moment, I felt good. Even though it was a bad situation, I felt good because I told her how I felt. But then after sitting and having, a conversation with her, instead of talking at her and being mad at her, I was able to see that my feelings were deceiving. I wasn't mad at her. Not at all. I misunderstood how she was reacting to the situation. I was upset about the situation, but I was directing my anger at her. And there's something that I've learned about myself. And I think I actually learned this recently, that sometimes I'm just looking for people to listen. Sometimes I'm just looking to be reassured that it's okay for me to feel how I feel within those moments of me expressing myself. And by a person doing that, that in turn creates a safe space for me to be transparent, because I feel like, okay, they're letting me know that, they're listening. They're not telling me what to do. They're not talking at me. They're not judging me. They're literally just listening and then reassuring me that these feelings are normal, that these feelings are okay. I put together this list. It's basically results of burying your feelings. Am I saying that right? That word right? Burying. Is it burying or burying? Burying. Okay. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. I need hooked on phonics for real. Okay. Number 1. So being withdrawn. And I pulled the definition from withdrawn to create this answer. So being detached and not responsive, both to yourself and those around you. So being withdrawn from a situation, like basically you shut down. And I do this a lot actually. When somebody says something to me after I feel like I've said, hey, you're doing this, or hey, you're making me feel this way, and you're not basically taking that into consideration, I will shut down. I do get quiet sometimes. I will become unresponsive in a sense to like I'm being an asshole, but that's because I felt like you're being an asshole. So that's probably not the best way to go about things, but hey, we're talking about reasons why we bury our feelings, okay? Number 2, being uncomfortable. A lot of times we bury our feelings because we're uncomfortable in our feelings. We're uncomfortable expressing ourselves. Number 3, reacting inappropriately. I talked about this earlier. Sometimes when I'm upset, I act inappropriately or irrationally. This is because sometimes our emotions are confusing. Sometimes our emotions create this level of dysfunction. Again, sometimes our emotions can be deceiving. Sometimes, again, I said this earlier, they can have you feeling good in a bad situation or about a bad situation. Number 4, I think sometimes we worry about projecting how we feel onto others and or how we feel, about how we feel, what we feel will be received. Did that make sense? Let me say that again. Let me slow down and say it, because sometimes I know I'll be like, and y'all be like, huh? So let me let me say it again. So we worry about projecting how we feel onto others and or how we feel will be received. Man, I can't read my own writing, so I'm sorry, but I hope that made sense. Number 5, and this is something that I do as well. I think that once we start opening up, we're afraid that we won't stop. So let's say if I'm telling someone about the feeling of lostness that I feel or a feeling of depression, I think that sometimes when I do that, I'm just going to keep going and going and going and getting deeper and deeper into that pit instead of coming out of that pit. But I always say this, understand that in order to get through something, you have to go through it. So if you have to spend 20 minutes talking about how your dog died and you feeling sad about it and you feeling depressed, go through that shit, because then you're going to be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. You're going to, again, be able to feel lighter, because we keep holding on to these things and things just get heavier and heavier and heavier. So we have to be able to articulate how we feel and not worry about if we're going to keep going on and going on and going on. Because I promise you, if a person creates a safe space for you to be expressive and to state how you feel and for you to be transparent, they're not going to get bored, because they're actually actively listening to what you're saying. They're, again, reassuring you that these feelings are okay. So with that last bit, I want y'all to understand that it's okay to express your negative feelings or your ill feelings, just as it is okay to express your positive feelings. A lot of times we avoid expressing negativity because we think it makes us negative people. No, it doesn't. In order, again, to get through it, you got to go through it. You got to release it to make space for positive things, for good energy. I once listened to this podcast, and it was basically about the issue with positive vibes only. We always talk about positive vibes only, positive vibes only, positive vibes only. But in order to have these positive vibes, you have to make way to release negative vibes. Does that make sense? You have to be able to talk about your frustrations, things that irritate you, things that you don't like, because you have to release them, because they do hold you down and they do take up space, which in turn makes you not have room for positive vibes. So yeah, I get it. Nobody wants somebody that's always negative or always coming to them with negative information and things like that. However, we do have to make room for negative conversation, negative feelings, because we have to release it. And a lot of people they're going to be negative people. It is what it is. But some people, and understand the difference between a negative person and a negative feeling, be able to separate those two. So when you are in a relationship, when you're in a friendship, when you're talking to your family or whomever, pay attention to that. Are they a negative person? Or are they just coming to you because they feel, again, safe coming to you, expressing these negative feelings? And the last reason that I have about why we bury our feelings is because confrontation or expressing our feelings or releasing our feelings requires us to face new emotions. So, using myself as an example again, if I were to express to someone that I was angry with them, that's going to in turn make me face a different emotion. It might make me face sadness, or it might make me face regret. But by unlocking one emotion, it's like a pivot move that we're unlocking a different emotion. And sometimes we just don't want to feel different emotions. We're content in being angry. We're comfortable being angry. And since we're talking about confrontation, understand that sometimes when you confront somebody else, you have to confront yourself. And sometimes we are not ready to confront ourselves about the emotions that we feel or things that we're experiencing. A few more things that I'm gonna let y'all go. Earlier, I mentioned being in an environment where you can express yourself. And what I mean by that, going back to the example with my sister, we were in a room with my parents. That wasn't the appropriate environment to have that conversation. We didn't need an audience. It was not my intention, and it wasn't her intention to put each other on blast. So we needed to be in an intimate setting where we could have the conversation, where we could make sure our tones were appropriate, where we could make sure our emotions were in check, and we could speak freely to each other without the sidebars from other people, without the looks from other people. Environment where you don't have the weight of other people's expectations for the outcome of that conversation. I guess my entire point is a standard response is not always warranted. Find those people that are your safe space, but also be uncomfortable and have those moments where you tell people how you feel. When they've upset you, when you feel like they've wronged you, when you feel like they made you feel a certain type of way. Today's quote comes from Robert Frost. The best way out is always through. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Dear World. Again, I'm your host, Miss Amber J. If you enjoyed your listening experience, don't forget to rate this podcast and share it with your family and friends. As always, drink your water, mind your business.